The scorching Arizona sun beat down on Violet Abrams' slender shoulders as she made her way to the small, whitewashed church at the edge of Yuma. The year was 1878, and like every Sunday for the past 3 years, she carried the weight of whispers heavier than any physical burden. Her steps faltered as she approached the building, the white steeple reaching toward a merciless blue sky that had denied her prayers for far too long. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, smoothing down her best calico dress, a small gesture of defiance against a town that had judged her lacking in the most fundamental way a woman could be judged. Inside, the church was already buzzing with townsfolk. Fans fluttered against the heat, and heads bent together in hushed conversation that suspiciously quieted as Violet entered. She kept her eyes forward, chin lifted, and took her usual place in the last pew. At 26, the years stretching empty of children's laughter had carved lines of quiet sorrow around her eyes that belied her youth. "Well, if it ain't the barren widow," came a whisper just loud enough to reach her ears. Eleanor Prescott, whose 6 children spilled from the pew across the aisle, didn't bother hiding her contemptuous glance. Violet's fingers tightened around her worn Bible. Her late husband Thomas had been dead for 3 years now, taken by fever just 18 months into their marriage. He had been kind, if not passionate, and they'd tried for a baby from their wedding night. When he died, the town's sympathy had evaporated quickly when it became clear she wasn't carrying his child. "The Lord doesn't gift everyone with his blessing," came another whispered comment, followed by muffled laughter. Violet fixed her eyes on the altar and pretended not to hear. She'd considered leaving Yuma 100 times, but where would she go? Her small seamstress business barely kept her fed, and she had no family left to return to. So she endured, Sunday after Sunday, the subtle and not-so-subtle reminders of her failure as a woman. The church doors swung open, bathing the entryway in blinding sunlight. A tall silhouette paused in the doorframe, commanding attention without intention. As the doors swung shut, Violet caught her breath. The newcomer was a stranger unusual enough in their small community, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hard work and danger. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, dark trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a vest that had seen better days. No guns visible, but something about the way he moved suggested he knew how to use them. His face was tanned and weathered beneath a shock of dark hair, and his eyes a startling, piercing blue scanned the congregation with measured assessment. The stranger nodded politely to Reverend Phillips and took a seat at the far end of Violet's pew, removing his hat and placing it beside him. She caught the faint scent of horses, leather, and something wild and untamed like the desert after rain. Reverend Phillips cleared his throat, calling the congregation to attention. "Brothers and sisters, today we gather to celebrate the Lord's bounty and mercy." The sermon proceeded as it always did, focused heavily on family, children, and the sacred duty of procreation. Violet had long since learned to let the words wash over her without piercing too deeply, but today they seemed particularly pointed. "And we must remember that it is through children that we find God's grace most purely reflected," the Reverend intoned, gesturing broadly. "A woman's highest calling is to bring forth new life, to nurture the next generation in Christ's teachings." Several heads turned toward Violet, some with pity, others with poorly concealed disdain. Eleanor Prescott's smile was particularly sharp. "Of course," the Reverend continued, "those whom God has not seen fit to bless with children must accept his judgment with humility. Perhaps there are." He paused meaningfully. "Reasons the Lord withholds such blessings from certain women." The implication hung in the air: sin, unworthiness. Violet's hands trembled slightly in her lap, but her expression remained composed. This too was familiar territory. "I hear the widow Abrams turned down John Hatcher's proposal last month," Eleanor Stage whispered to her friend. "What's she waiting for? Not like she's got prospects lining up and she ain't getting any younger." "Pride," her friend replied, loud enough for the back 3 pews to hear. "Too proud to admit she needs a man. Maybe that's why the good Lord ain't blessed her womb." Violet felt heat rising in her cheeks. John Hatcher was 53, had buried 2 wives already, and had made it abundantly clear he was interested only in acquiring a caretaker for his 5 unruly sons. She'd rather starve than submit to such a loveless arrangement. The Reverend's sermon reached its crescendo. And let us pray for those among us who remain childless, that they might find purpose despite their unfulfilled calling. Let us help them bear their burden of emptiness. That was when Alina Prescott stood up, her voice dripping with false concern. Reverend, perhaps we should take up a special collection for poor widow Abrams. She must be so. Her eyes slid to Violet, incomplete. Maybe if we all pray hard enough, God might yet find her worthy of a child. Several people tittered. Reverend Phillips looked uncomfortable but didn't rebuke Alina. And maybe, added Alina's husband from beside her, we should find her a husband who doesn't mind taking on damaged goods. This brought outright laughter from several of the men. Violet sat frozen, humiliation burning through her. She'd endured whispers and sidelong glances for years, but never such public mockery. Her eyes stung with unshed tears as she stared fixedly at her hands, willing herself not to flee. That's enough. The voice was deep and quiet, yet it cut through the laughter like a blade. The stranger at the end of Violet's pew had risen to his feet, his blue eyes cold as winter sky. I don't know much about your town or your ways, he said, his voice carrying easily in the suddenly silent church, but where I come from, we don't mock a woman's suffering, especially not in God's house. Alina Prescott drew herself up indignantly. This is a private matter, stranger. You've no right. I've got every right to speak when I see cruelty masquerading as righteousness, he interrupted, his tone level but unyielding. This woman has endured more pain than most of you can imagine, yet she sits here every Sunday with dignity while you peck at her like vultures. He looked around the congregation, his gaze challenging each face it met. You talk of God's blessings as if they're rewards for the worthy, but I've seen mothers abandon their children, seen men father babes they never acknowledge. The ability to bear children doesn't make anyone worthy. He turned to face Violet directly, and the compassion in his eyes nearly undid her. From what I can see, this woman has more strength than the lot of you combined. Strength isn't measured by how many children you bear, but by how you face life's hardships. The church was deathly silent. Even Reverend Phillips seemed at a loss for words. Now, the stranger continued, I believe we were here to worship, not to judge, unless I misunderstood the purpose of church. He sat back down, seemingly untroubled by the stares directed his way. Violet couldn't move, couldn't breathe. No one had ever defended her like that, not her late husband, not anyone. She didn't even know this man's name, yet he had just upended years of silent suffering with a few words. The remainder of the service passed in uncomfortable tension. When it finally ended, people filed out quickly, avoiding Violet's eyes. She remained seated, unsure how to process what had happened. The stranger stood, placing his hat on his head. Madam, he said with a slight nod, and then he was striding down the aisle, out into the sunlight. Violet found herself hurrying after him before she could think better of it. Outside, the heat hit her like a wall, but she pressed on, catching up to him at the hitching post where a magnificent chestnut gelding waited. Sir, she called, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. I thank you. What you did in there, no one's ever. He turned, studying her with those remarkable blue eyes. Up close, she could see the faint lines at their corners, the small scar that cut through his right eyebrow. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but his face had character strength and a hint of gentleness that seemed at odds with his weathered appearance. No need for thanks, madam. I just can't abide bullies, especially ones hiding behind the Bible. I'm Violet Abrams, she said, extending her hand before propriety could stop her. A slight smile touched his lips as he took her hand briefly. His palm was calloused but warm. Vaughn Irvine, pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Abrams. What brings you to Yuma, Mr. Irvine? She asked, reluctant to end their conversation though she knew people were watching. Just passing through. I've got a job waiting in Tucson. He untied his horse, whose coat gleamed like burnished copper in the sunlight, though I'm finding Yuma more interesting than I expected. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, and Violet felt something flutter in her chest, a sensation she'd almost forgotten. Will you be staying long? The question slipped out before she could stop it. A few days. Need to rest my horse and replenish supplies. He paused. Is there a decent place to eat in this town? Hattie's Cafe serves the best food in Yuma. It's just down the street past the Mercantile. Violet hesitated, then added with newfound boldness, I often take my Sunday dinner there. Vaughn's smile widened slightly. Good to know. Perhaps I'll see you there, Mrs. Abrams. He mounted his horse with fluid grace, tipped his hat to her, and rode slowly down the dusty main street. Violet watched him go, aware of the whispers behind her, but for once completely indifferent to them. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something like hope stirring in her heart. Hattie's Cafe was busier than usual that Sunday, as if the entire congregation had decided to witness whatever might transpire between Violet and the mysterious stranger. When Violet entered, conversation dimmed momentarily before resuming at an artificially high volume. She took her usual table by the window, smoothing her napkin over her lap with hands that weren't quite steady. She told herself it was foolish to expect him to come, foolish to feel this strange anticipation over a man she'd just met. Coffee, Violet. Hattie herself appeared, coffee pot in hand and curiosity evident in her kind face. Yes, please, and the Sunday special. Coming right up. Hattie hesitated. That was something in church today, never seen Alina Prescott struck speechless before. Her eyes twinkled. About time someone stood up to that woman's meanness. Violet managed a small smile. It was unexpected, he's staying at the hotel. Asked for a bath and a shave after he got a room. Hattie's information delivery was casual but deliberate. Handsome man once you get past all that trail dust. Before Violet could respond, the bell above the door jingled. Conversation faltered again as Vaughn Irvine stepped inside. He'd clearly made use of the hotel's facilities. His dark hair was damp and neatly combed, his face freshly shaven except for a well-trimmed mustache. He wore a clean shirt and the same vest, which Violet now noticed was a deep burgundy leather, well worn but of good quality. His eyes found hers immediately, and he crossed the room with confident strides. Mrs. Abrams, mind if I join you, please, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Hattie appeared as if by magic. Special for you too, mister. Whatever the lady's having is fine with me, madam, he replied with a polite nod. When Hattie bustled away, Vaughn settled back in his chair, seemingly oblivious to the surreptitious glances from other diners. Small towns, he commented, always hungry for something new to talk about. And today that's us, Violet said, surprising herself with her directness. Does that bother you? She considered this. It probably should, but after what happened in church, this seems minor, she hesitated. Mr. Irvine, Vaughn, please, Vaughn. The name felt intimate on her tongue. What you did today, no one's ever stood up for me like that. His expression darkened slightly. Has it always been that bad? Violet traced the pattern on the tablecloth with her finger. It got worse after Thomas, my husband, died, when months passed and it became clear I wasn't with child. Well, in a place like Yuma, a woman's worth is measured by her family. And before that, were you and your husband trying for children? The directness of the question would normally have scandalized her, but there was nothing prurient in his tone, only genuine interest. Yes, from the beginning. Thomas wanted sons badly, she swallowed. The doctor in Phoenix said there might be something wrong with me that I might never conceive. I'm sorry, he said simply. The lack of platitudes was refreshing. What about you? Do you have family somewhere? A shadow passed across his face. Not anymore. My wife and daughter died of cholera 5 years ago. Caroline was just 4. Violet's heart constricted. I'm so sorry. It was a bad outbreak, took half the town. His eyes grew distant. After that, I couldn't stay, been drifting ever since, taking work where I can find it. I was a rancher before, but now I mostly scout for the cavalry, guide settlers, that kind of thing. Hattie returned with their meals: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh vegetables from someone's garden. The food was a welcome distraction from the intensity of their conversation. So why Tucson? Violet asked after they'd eaten in companionable silence for a few minutes. Army contract. They need scouts familiar with Apache territory. He cut another piece of beef. I've spent enough time in those mountains to know my way around. Isn't that dangerous? He shrugged. Life's dangerous. At least this way I'm doing something useful. Violet studied him, this man who carried his grief without letting it consume him, who had found purpose despite his loss. She envied that. What about you? He asked. Ever think of leaving Yuma? All the time, she admitted. But where would I go? I have no family, little money. My seamstress work barely keeps me afloat here. You're good with a needle. Very good. It's the one thing I can do well. There was no vanity in the statement, just simple fact. Tucson's growing fast. They could use a skilled seamstress. His tone was casual, but his eyes were intent on her face. Violet's heart skipped. Are you suggesting I move to Tucson? Just mentioning an opportunity. Sometimes a fresh start is what a person needs. Before she could respond, a commotion at the door drew their attention. John Hatcher had entered with two of his sons, his florid face betraying he'd already been drinking despite it being Sunday. His rheumy eyes landed on Violet, then narrowed as he took in Vaughn. Well, Widow Abrams found herself a new man already. He staggered slightly as he approached their table. Moving on mighty quick, ain't you? Vaughn's posture shifted subtly, alert but relaxed. Sir, we're just having a meal. Didn't ask you, stranger. Hatcher's breath reeked of cheap whiskey. Been trying to court this woman proper for months, but she's too high and mighty for the likes of me. He leaned closer to Violet. But you'll spread your legs quick enough for this drifter, I bet. Violet flinched as if struck. The cafe had gone silent, every eye on their table. Vaughn stood slowly, his movement fluid but menacing. You need to apologize to the lady and walk away. Hatcher puffed up his chest. Or what? You gonna make me, boy? I'd rather not, Vaughn said evenly, but I will if necessary. One of Hatcher's sons, a burly young man with his father's mean eyes, stepped forward. Pa, let's just go. No, I ain't being run off by some saddled tramp. Hatcher jabbed a finger toward Violet. This woman thinks she's better than everyone in Yuma. Too good for a respectable widower like me, but she'll welcome a stranger into her bed quick enough. Vaughn moved so fast that Violet barely saw it. One moment he was standing calmly, the next he had Hatcher by the collar, backed against the nearest wall. There was no violence in the movement, just irresistible force. That's enough, Vaughn said, his voice soft but carrying in the silent room. Mrs. Abrams is a lady, and you will speak of her with respect, or you won't speak of her at all. Are we clear? Hatcher's face had gone from red to purple. His sons hovered uncertainly nearby, clearly unwilling to challenge Vaughn. You're making a mistake, stranger, Hatcher wheezed. I got friends in this town, and I don't care. Vaughn released him and stepped back. Now apologize to the lady. For a moment, it seemed Hatcher might refuse. Then, perhaps seeing something in Vaughn's eyes that convinced him of the wisdom of compliance, he mumbled, Sorry, Mrs. Abrams. Now leave, Vaughn said, the command unmistakable. Hatcher straightened his collar, shot Vaughn a venomous look, and stomped out with his sons trailing behind. The cafe remained silent as Vaughn returned to his seat. I apologize for the disturbance, he said to Violet, his voice perfectly composed. She stared at him, heart pounding. Twice in one day this man had defended her honor. Twice he had done what no one else in Yuma had ever bothered to do. Thank you, she said softly. Hattie appeared with coffee refills and a conspiratorial wink. On the house. That's the most excitement we've had in here since the Dobson twins got into that fistfight last Christmas. As conversation gradually resumed around them, Violet found herself studying Vaughn with new eyes. He wasn't just physically strong, there was a moral force to him, an unwavering sense of right and wrong that seemed as natural as breathing. You said you're staying a few days. She asked, trying to keep her voice casual. That was my plan. Need to get some supplies, let my horse rest. I could show you around if you'd like. Yuma's not much, but it has its points of interest. His smile was slow and genuine. I'd like that very much, Mrs. Abrams. Violet, she corrected him softly. Please call me Violet. In the warm light of the cafe, with the buzz of conversation around them and the scent of good food in the air, something shifted between them, subtle as a change in the wind, but undeniable. Violet felt it in the quickening of her pulse, saw it reflected in the quiet intensity of his gaze. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Violet felt truly seen. The next morning dawned clear and promising. Violet woke early. a nervous energy propelling her through her morning routine with unusual haste. She'd agreed to meet Vaughn at 9, giving her time to complete her most pressing sewing commissions first, as her fingers worked the familiar patterns hemming Mrs. Winslow's curtains, attaching buttons to Sheriff Barton's spare shirt. Her mind wandered. What was she doing? Agreeing to spend the day with a man she barely knew, a man who would be leaving for Tucson in a matter of days, yet she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. It wasn't just gratitude for his defense of her, though that certainly played a part. There was something about Vaughn Irvine that called to her, perhaps the quiet strength he carried, or the understanding in his eyes when she spoke of her inability to have children. He had lost a child, yet he didn't look at her with pity or judgment. That alone made him unlike anyone she'd met since the doctor had delivered his grim verdict 3 years ago. At precisely 9 o'clock, a knock sounded at her door. Violet smoothed her hair. She'd chosen her blue dress, the one that brought out the color of her eyes, and took a steadying breath before answering. Vaughn stood on her small porch, hat in hand. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His clothes were neat, his boots polished. The morning sun caught the silver at his temples, a premature gray that somehow only enhanced his rugged appeal. "Good morning," he said, and even those simple words in his deep voice sent a flutter through her stomach. "Good morning." She stepped out, locking the door behind her. "I thought we might start at the river. It's the best part of Yuma, in my opinion. Lead the way." They walked side by side down the dusty street. Violet was acutely aware of the stares following them, but for once she didn't care what people thought. Let them talk. After yesterday's confrontations, they would anyway. The Colorado River was Yuma's lifeblood, a ribbon of blue cutting through the arid landscape. They followed a path along its bank, where cottonwoods provided welcome shade. In the distance, the territorial prison stood on its hill, a stark reminder of civilization's harsher aspects. "I come here almost every day," Violet admitted as they paused to watch the water flow past. "It's peaceful, makes my troubles seem smaller somehow." Vaughn nodded. "Water has that effect." Out on the trail, finding a good river or creek can be the difference between life and death. There's something sacred about it. "Is it very difficult, the life you lead?" He considered this. "Lonely, more than difficult. You get used to the physical hardships, sleeping rough, riding for days, dealing with weather and terrain. But the solitude." He trailed off, gazing at the river. "After Caroline and Mary died, I welcomed it, needed it even, but lately. You've been thinking of settling somewhere?" Violet asked when he didn't continue. "Been thinking it might be time to stop running, at least." He glanced at her. "What about you? If you could leave Yuma, where would you go?" Violet had asked herself this question countless times. "Somewhere green," she said finally. "Somewhere with trees and grass and flowers that don't need constant watering just to survive. Somewhere people don't know me as the barren widow. San Francisco, maybe, or up north to Oregon. Too far, too expensive," she sighed. "Dreams are free, though." They continued walking, conversation flowing easily between them. Vaughn told her about his ranch in Colorado before the cholera outbreak, the horses he'd bred, the small herd of cattle, the cabin he'd built with his own hands. Violet shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, her journey west with her parents, who had both died of fever the first year in Arizona, her marriage to Thomas, who had been her father's business partner and 20 years her senior. "It wasn't a love match," she admitted as they sat on a fallen log in the shade. "But he was kind to me, and I had nowhere else to go after my parents died. He wanted children, desperately sons, to inherit his small mining interests, when months passed and I didn't conceive." She twisted her hands in her lap. "He was disappointed, but he never blamed me, not like the town did after he died. People fear what they don't understand," Vaughn said quietly, "and they fear women who don't fit the mold they've created." "Is that why you defended me?" "Because I don't fit the mold." His eyes, so startlingly blue against his tanned skin, met hers directly. "I defended you because what they were doing was wrong, and because I recognized something in you, a kind of solitary strength I understand too well." The honesty in his voice touched something deep within her. Here was a man who saw her not as a failed wife or a barren woman, but as a person of value. "Thank you," she said simply, because there were no other words adequate to express what she felt. They spent the rest of the morning exploring Yuma's better aspects, the small but well-stocked library, the territorial administrative buildings, the surprisingly elegant hotel where Vaughn was staying. By unspoken agreement, they avoided the busier parts of town, seeking privacy from curious eyes. At noon, Vaughn suggested they take lunch back to the river. He disappeared into the general store and emerged with a basket containing bread, cheese, cold chicken, and a bottle of lemonade. A picnic. Violet couldn't hide her delight. No one had ever arranged such a thing for her. If that's agreeable to you. They found a secluded spot beneath a stand of cottonwoods, where the river's gurgle provided a soothing backdrop. Vaughn spread his coat on the ground for her to sit on, a gesture of chivalry that charmed her more than it should have. As they ate, Violet found herself studying him, the graceful efficiency of his movements, the thoughtful way he listened when she spoke, the rare but transformative smile that softened his weathered features. "You're staring," he noted, amusement warming his voice. Violet blushed. "I'm sorry." "I was just—" What could she say? That she was memorizing him, that she was trying to understand the strange connection she felt to this man after just one day. Just what? He prompted gently when she didn't continue. "Trying to figure you out," she admitted. "Men like you don't usually notice women like me." His expression grew serious. "What kind of man do you think I am?" Violet, the question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. "The kind who could have any woman he wanted," she said finally, honesty compelling her forward. "Handsome, strong, principled. The kind who wouldn't normally look twice at a plain widow with nothing to offer." Vaughn set aside his food and shifted closer to her. "Is that really how you see yourself?" The gentleness in his voice nearly undid her. "It's how everyone sees me, not everyone." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The simple touch sent warmth cascading through her. "I see a woman of remarkable courage, beautiful, intelligent, resilient. You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough." His hand lingered near her face. "I know you face that church full of cruel people every week with your head held high. I know you've built a life for yourself despite losing everything. I know when you smile, really smile, like you did when I suggested this picnic, it lights up your whole face." Violet's heart pounded so hard she was certain he must hear it. No one had ever spoken to her this way, looked at her this way as if she were precious. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the river's flow. "Because you deserve kindness." His thumb brushed her cheek, feather light. "And because from the moment I saw you in that church, something in me recognized something in you. I can't explain it better than that." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Violet found herself leaning slightly into his touch, drawn by a force as natural and inevitable as gravity. "I leave for Tucson in 3 days," he said softly. "I know." His eyes searched hers, looking for something she couldn't name. Whatever it was, he seemed to find it. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Violet didn't want to pull away. Instead, she found herself responding, her hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel the strong, steady beat of his heart. When they finally parted, Violet's eyes remained closed for a moment, savoring the sensation. When she opened them, Vaughn was watching her with an expression of wonder. "I shouldn't have done that," he said, though he didn't sound particularly regretful. "I'm glad you did." The boldness of her response surprised even her. He smiled then, a full, unreserved smile that transformed his face. "So am I." They spent the remainder of the afternoon in a kind of dream state, talking, laughing, sharing stories. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the river, Vaughn walked Violet back to her small house on the edge of town. At her door, he hesitated. "May I see you tomorrow?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "I'd like that very much." He took her hand and raised it to his lips, a courtly gesture that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance yet felt entirely natural. "Until tomorrow, then." Violet watched him walk away, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it. She knew she was walking a dangerous path. In 3 days, he would leave for Tucson. Her heart would break just as it was beginning to heal, yet she couldn't bring herself to regret a single moment of this day. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. The next 2 days passed in a blur of shared moments. Vaughn helped Violet deliver her completed sewing projects, their hands brushing as they passed bundles back and forth. They ate meals together at Hattie's, ignoring the curious stares. He told her more about his life on the trail, and she shared her dreams of someday opening a proper dress shop. On the second evening, he kissed her again, more deeply this time, his arms encircling her waist as they stood in the shadow of her porch. Violet felt herself responding with a passion she hadn't known she possessed, her body awakening to sensations long dormant. When they finally drew apart, breathless, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "I leave tomorrow," he said, the words hanging heavy between them. "I know." Violet closed her eyes, fighting back tears. It was foolish to cry over a man she'd known less than a week, yet she couldn't deny the depth of what she felt. "Come with me," he said suddenly, her eyes flew open. "What? Come with me to Tucson?" His gaze was intense, his hands warm on her waist. "It's a bigger town, growing fast. You could open that dress shop you've dreamed of. We could." He hesitated. "We could see where this leads." Violet's mind raced. Leave Yuma, just like that. It was madness. Yet the thought of watching him ride away tomorrow, never knowing what might have been, seemed like a greater madness still. "People would talk," she said weakly. "People already talk. Let them. I barely know you. You know the parts that matter, the rest we can learn together." She studied his face in the fading light, the earnestness in his eyes, the hopeful set of his mouth. "What if it doesn't work out? What if you change your mind about a woman who can't give you children?" His expression softened. "Violet, I've already had a child. The most perfect little girl in the world. When she and her mother died, I thought that part of my life was over forever." He took her hands in his. "I'm not looking for someone to bear my children. I'm looking for a companion, a partner, someone to share life's joys and sorrows with." "And you think that could be me?" Her voice trembled slightly. "I think it could be, if you're willing to take the chance." Violet looked past him to the dusty street, the familiar buildings of Yuma outlined against the darkening sky. What was holding her here? A business that barely sustained her, neighbors who pitied or despised her, painful memories at every turn. "Yes," she heard herself say, the word coming from some deep, certain place inside her. "Yes, I'll come with you." The smile that lit his face was worth any risk. He lifted her off her feet in a spontaneous embrace that made her laugh out loud, a free, joyful sound she barely recognized as her own. "We'll leave at dawn," he said when he set her down. "Pack only what you need. We can buy the rest in Tucson." They spent the next hour planning what she would bring, the route they would take, where they might stay when they arrived. It was reckless and impulsive and entirely unlike the careful, contained life Violet had led since Thomas died. Yet it felt more right than anything had in years. When Vaughn finally left to make his own preparations, Violet closed her door and leaned against it, her heart pounding with equal parts fear and exhilaration. She was leaving Yuma, starting fresh, with a man she had known less than a week but who understood her in ways no one else ever had. "God help me," she whispered to the empty room. "Let this be the right choice." She spent the next hours sorting through her possessions, choosing what to take and what to leave behind. Her sewing materials were non-negotiable: the fine needles, quality thread, and special scissors she had invested in over the years. A few books she treasured. The silver locket that had been her mother's. Practical clothing for the journey. As she packed, a sense of lightness grew within her. She was shedding more than possessions, she was leaving behind the weight of judgment, the burden of being the object of pity and scorn. By midnight, her preparations were complete. She would sell her small house to Hattie, who had been looking for a place for her newly married daughter. The arrangement had been quickly agreed upon when Violet had stopped by the cafe to share her news. "About time someone swept you off your feet," Hattie had said with genuine delight. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon, Violet Abrams. Don't you dare let him go." Violet climbed into bed for one last night in the house that had been both sanctuary and prison. Tomorrow would bring a new beginning, uncertain, yes, but full of possibilities she had thought forever close to her. She slept fitfully, waking before dawn to the sound of rain pattering against her roof, unusual for Yuma this time of year. By the time she had dressed and finished her final preparations, however, the shower had passed, leaving the air fresh and clean, the normally dusty streets temporarily tamed. A knock at exactly 6 o'clock announced Vaughn's arrival. When she opened the door, he stood there with his chestnut gelding and a second horse, a pretty gray mare with intelligent eyes. "For you," he said, patting the mare's neck. "Her name's Willow. Bought her from the livery last night. Owner says she's gentle but sure-footed." Violet approached the mare cautiously. She had ridden as a girl but not in many years. Willow nudged her shoulder with a velvety nose, and Violet felt an immediate connection to the animal. "She's beautiful," she said, stroking the mare's neck. "Thank you." "Ready?" Vaughn asked, taking her small trunk and securing it behind his saddle. Violet looked back at the house one last time, then at the street where a few early risers were already moving about, casting curious glances their way. "Ready," she confirmed. With Vaughn's help, she mounted Willow, adjusting her skirts as best she could. She had worn her most practical dress for traveling, but made a mental note to acquire proper riding clothes in Tucson. They rode slowly down Yuma's main street, just as the sun crested the eastern hills, painting the buildings in golden light. Violet noticed Alina Prescott watching from her front porch, mouth agape at the sight of the barren widow leaving town with the handsome stranger. The petty part of her wanted to wave, but she refrained, keeping her eyes forward toward the road that would take them east. At the edge of town, Vaughn reached across the space between their horses and took her hand briefly. "Any regrets?" Violet looked back at Yuma, the town where she had known both happiness and profound sorrow, where she had been a daughter, a wife, and finally a widow scorned for something beyond her control. "None," she said with certainty. They rode on, the rising sun at their backs casting their shadows long before them on the dusty road to Tucson. The journey to Tucson would take several days, following the stagecoach route that wound through the Arizona territory. The rain that had briefly visited Yuma had made the normally harsh landscape bloom with unexpected patches of colored desert wildflowers seizing their brief chance at life. They rode at an easy pace, mindful of Violet's inexperience on horseback. By midday, she was feeling the effects of the unfamiliar activity, but she said nothing, determined not to slow their progress. Vaughn, however, noticed her discomfort. "We'll stop here for a while," he said, indicating a small grove of mesquite trees near a shallow creek. "Rest the horses and ourselves." Grateful, Violet slid from Willow's back, wincing as her stiff muscles protested. Vaughn was at her side immediately, his hand steady on her waist. "You should have said something," he chided gently. "We're in no hurry." "I didn't want to be a burden," she admitted, his expression softened. "You could never be that." He helped her to a flat rock in the shade. "Sit. I'll get some food from the packs." As he moved away, Violet massaged her sore legs and reflected on the strangeness of her situation. 3 days ago, she had been the pitied widow of Yuma, enduring whispers and judgment. Now she was on the open road with a man she barely knew but somehow trusted completely, heading toward a new life. Vaughn returned with bread, dried beef, and apples, along with a canteen of water. They ate in companionable silence, listening to the gentle gurgle of the creek and the occasional call of a desert bird. "We'll make camp early today," Vaughn said as they finished their meal. "Let you get used to the saddle gradually. There's a good spot about 2 hours ahead, according to my map." Violet nodded, grateful for his consideration. "Have you traveled this route before?" "A few times. It's safe enough, especially since the army increased patrols. Still, we'll be careful." He paused, studying her. Having second thoughts, "No," she said honestly, "just adjusting to the reality of it all. Yesterday I was a seamstress in Yuma. Today I'm not entirely sure what I am." He smiled, the expression warming his eyes. "You're a woman having an adventure, starting fresh." "With a man I met less than a week ago," she added, but returned his smile to show she wasn't complaining. "Sometimes life's best gifts come unexpectedly." He reached out, taking her hand in his larger one. "I never planned to stop in Yuma for more than a night. Never planned to attend church that Sunday morning, but something fate, God, chance led me there and I saw you." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "And what did you see exactly?" "Courage," he said without hesitation. "Dignity in the face of cruelty and—" he hesitated. "Loneliness that matched my own." Violet's throat tightened with emotion. "I was so lonely," she whispered. "Even when Thomas was alive, he was kind, but there was never passion between us, never true understanding." Vaughn's thumb traced circles on her palm, a small gesture that sent warmth spreading through her. "And now I'm terrified and exhilarated in equal measure," she admitted with a small laugh. "But not lonely, not with you." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that made her shiver despite the desert heat. "We should get back on the road if we want to reach that campsite before dark." The remainder of the afternoon passed more comfortably, Violet growing accustomed to Willow's steady gait. They talked as they rode, not of the past or future, but of small things. Favorite books, foods they enjoyed, the beauty of the landscape around them. In these ordinary exchanges, Violet felt a deepening connection to Vaughn, an ease that belied their short acquaintance. True to his word, they made camp early, in a sheltered hollow near another small creek. Vaughn efficiently set up a simple camp, unrolling bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire he built. The propriety of the arrangement touched Violet. He had not assumed anything about the nature of their relationship, despite her willingness to accompany him. As darkness fell, they sat by the fire, sharing the coffee Vaughn had brewed in a battered pot. The stars emerged overhead, more brilliant than Violet had ever seen them. "They're so clear out here," she marveled, head tilted back to take in the vast expanse of sky. "One of the best things about trail life," Vaughn agreed. "No lamps or buildings to dim the view." A comfortable silence fell between them. The fire popped and crackled, sending sparks upward to join the stars. In the distance, a coyote called, its mournful cry echoing across the desert. "What will we do in Tucson?" Violet asked finally. Vaughn added another stick to the fire before answering. "I'll complete my contract with the Army. It's only for 3 months. After that." He looked at her across the flames. "What do you want to do?" The question startled her. No one had asked about her desires in so long. "I want to open a dress shop," she said, the dream she had nurtured in secret finally spoken aloud. "Not just mending and alterations, but designing and creating beautiful things. I have some money saved, not much, but enough to start." "Tucson has plenty of wealthy mine owners' wives who would appreciate fine dressmaking," he observed, "and the officers' wives at the fort. You think it could work?" Hope fluttered in her chest. "I do." His confidence warmed her more than the fire. "And I could help. I've been saving most of what I've earned these past years. No point in spending money on the trail." Violet shifted uncomfortably. "I don't expect you to finance my dream, Vaughn. I know you don't. That's part of why I want to." He leaned forward, his face serious in the firelight. "Violet, I don't know exactly what's happening between us. It's fast and unexpected, and by any normal standard, completely reckless. But I know I want to see where it leads." "So do I," she admitted softly. "Then let me help you build the life you want in Tucson. Not because you need rescuing. You're the strongest woman I've ever met, but because I want to be part of whatever you create there." Tears pricked at Violet's eyes. No one had ever believed in her this way, seen possibilities in her that she barely dared acknowledge herself. "Thank you," she whispered. He reached across the fire, taking her hand. "You should get some sleep. Tomorrow will be another long day." Violet nodded, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. As she settled into her bedroll, she watched Vaughn bank the fire for the night, his movements efficient in the dim light. This man, who had defended her honor twice in one day, who saw her not as damaged goods but as someone of value, who was offering her not just protection but partnership, he seemed almost too good to be true. Yet as she drifted toward sleep, listening to the night sounds of the desert and Vaughn's quiet breathing across the fire, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, after so much sorrow, the universe was finally offering her a chance at happiness. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern, riding by day through increasingly varied terrain as they left the low desert and climbed toward the higher elevation of Tucson, making camp each night under the brilliant stars. Violet's confidence on horseback grew, as did her comfort with the rhythms of trail life. They encountered few other travelers, a freight wagon heading west, a solitary male rider, a family in a battered wagon moving to claim land near the Gila River. Each night, Vaughn maintained the respectful distance between their bedrolls, though their conversations grew increasingly intimate. On the fourth evening, as they made camp in a small canyon with walls that glowed red in the setting sun, Violet found the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind since they left Yuma. Does it truly not matter to you that I can't have children? Vaughn, who had been unsaddling his horse, paused and turned to her. No, Violet, it doesn't matter. But you loved being a father. I can see it when you talk about Caroline. He secured the saddle on a nearby rock and approached her, his expression thoughtful. I did love being a father. Caroline was the light of my life. He took Violet's hands in his. But there are many ways to be a family. There are children who need homes, orphans, abandoned children. If someday we decide that's what we want, there are options. The word hung between them, full of promise. I'm not asking for any commitments now, he said quickly. It's too soon, but I know what I feel for you is real, Violet, more real than anything I've felt since Mary died. Violet's heart pounded. I feel it too, she admitted, and it terrifies me. Why? Because happiness has always been temporary for me. Every time I've dared to hope for something good, it's been taken away. Her voice trembled slightly. My parents, Thomas, the chance for children, I'm afraid to believe this could be different. Vaughn's eyes, so startlingly blue in his weathered face, held her steadily. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise that as long as I'm breathing, I will do everything in my power to make you happy. The simple sincerity of his words undid her. Tears spilled down her cheeks, not of sorrow but of a cautious, newborn joy. Vaughn drew her gently into his arms, one hand cradling the back of her head as she pressed her face against his chest. His heartbeat was strong and steady under her ear, a rhythm she was coming to associate with safety. I'm sorry, she murmured against his shirt. I don't usually cry like this. His chest rumbled with a soft chuckle. Don't apologize, not with me. Violet lifted her head to look at him, suddenly very aware of the warmth of his body against hers, the strength in the arms that held her so carefully. Something shifted in his expression. As he read the change in hers, his eyes darkened, his breath coming a little quicker. When he lowered his mouth to hers, the kiss was different from their previous ones, deeper, more urgent. Violet responded without hesitation, her arms sliding up around his neck as she pressed closer to him. His hands spanned her waist, holding her as if she were precious but not fragile. The kiss stretched on, deepening further until Violet felt dizzy with the sensations coursing through her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. I should stop, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Before I can't, Violet's heart raced. In her marriage to Thomas, physical intimacy had been a duty rather than a pleasure, something to be endured in hopes of conceiving. What she felt now was entirely different, a hunger, a need that had nothing to do with procreation and everything to do with connection. What if I don't want you to stop? The boldness of her words surprised her. Vaughn drew back slightly to study her face. Violet, you deserve more than a bedroll in the desert. I deserve to make my own choices, she countered softly. And I choose you, Vaughn, here, now. For a long moment, he seemed to search for words. Then, with infinite tenderness, he cupped her face in his hands. Are you certain? There's no rush. In answer, Violet rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his once more. This time, there was no hesitation in his response. Later, as they lay together in the joined bedrolls, beneath a canopy of stars, Violet's head resting on Vaughn's chest and his arm wrapped securely around her, she marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From the humiliation of that Sunday in church to this moment of perfect contentment, it seemed impossible that only a week had passed. What are you thinking? Vaughn's voice was a low rumble beneath her ear. That a week ago, I didn't know you existed. And now I can't imagine my life without you in it. His arm tightened around her. You won't have to. They reached Tucson late the next afternoon. The town was considerably larger than Yuma, sprawling across a valley surrounded by mountains. The adobe buildings glowed golden in the late sunlight, and the streets bustled with a diverse population Mexican families who had been there for generations, Anglo settlers, soldiers from the nearby fort, and a scattering of Chinese merchants. Vaughn led them to a modest hotel near the center of town. "We'll stay here until we find more permanent lodgings," he said as they dismounted. "The army provides housing at the fort, but—" He hesitated. "I thought you might prefer something in town, closer to where you might want your shop." Violet, sore from the long journey but filled with excitement at the sight of her new home, nodded. Yes, that would be better. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. Vaughn reported to Fort Lowell to begin his scouting contract, while Violet explored Tucson with growing confidence. She found a small but well-positioned storefront for rent on one of the main streets. With living quarters above it, that would be perfect for the two of them. When she showed it to Vaughn that evening, his enthusiasm matched hers. "It's perfect," he agreed, inspecting the large front windows that would showcase her creations. And the location couldn't be better. Within days, they had signed a lease and begun moving in their meager possessions. Vaughn's army salary and their combined savings allowed them to purchase the essential furnishings: a bed, a table and chairs, cookware for the small kitchen. The shop itself would need more work, but Violet already had plans for display cases and a fitting area. 2 weeks after their arrival, Violet stood in the empty shopfront, mentally arranging the space. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the possibilities. She had already acquired a few clients. The hotel owner's wife had commissioned a new dress after seeing Violet's own carefully made garments, and word was spreading among the town's more affluent women. The bell over the door jingled as Vaughn entered, still in his buckskins from a day of scouting. His face lit up at the sight of her. "Good day," he asked, crossing to kiss her gently. "Wonderful. Mrs. Hollister asked if I could make her daughter's wedding dress, and Mrs. Diaz from the Mercantile wants 3 new dresses for her girls." Violet couldn't keep the excitement from her voice. "What about you? How was the scouting?" "Uneventful, which is the best kind." He glanced around the empty shop. "You know what this place needs? A sign." Violet blinked. "A sign? For your shop? It should have a name, shouldn't it?" She hadn't thought that far ahead yet. "I suppose it should." "What do you think it should be called?" Vaughn considered for a moment. Violet's Creations, Abrams Dressmaking, neither seemed quite right to her. "What about New Beginnings?" she suggested, "because that's what this is for both of us." His smile was answer enough. "New Beginnings it is." "I'll commission the sign tomorrow." That night, as they lay together in their new bed, Vaughn propped himself on one elbow to look down at her. His expression was unusually serious. "I've been thinking," he said, tracing a gentle finger along her collarbone. "These past weeks have been the happiest I can remember since before I lost Mary and Caroline." Violet's heart quickened at his tone. "For me too. I know it's fast. I know by any normal standard we've rushed into this." He captured her hand, bringing it to his lips. "But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Violet." The words, so simple yet so profound, brought tears to her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered, the truth of it resonating through her entire being. "Then marry me." It wasn't a question so much as a declaration. "Be my wife. Let's build this new beginning together properly." Joy bubbled up within her, so intense it was almost painful. "Yes," she said, pulling him down for a kiss. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at Tucson's small church. The congregation was largely strangers, a few army wives Violet had met through her dressmaking, some of Vaughn's colleagues from the fort, their landlady, and her family. Yet the absence of old judgments and whispers made the day perfect in Violet's eyes. She wore a dress of her own making, pale blue silk that brought out her eyes and fell in elegant lines from her shoulders. Vaughn, in a new suit rather than his usual buckskins, looked so handsome that her breath caught when she saw him waiting for her at the altar. The Reverend, a young man with kind eyes, smiled as he pronounced them husband and wife. When Vaughn kissed her, sealing their vows, Violet felt a sense of homecoming unlike anything she'd ever known. Their life together fell into a rhythm that suited them both. Vaughn's scouting duties took him away for a few days at a time, but he always returned to her with stories of the wild country and renewed appreciation for the home they were building. Violet's shop, New Beginnings, proclaimed in elegant gold lettering over the door, flourished as her reputation for fine workmanship spread. 4 months into their marriage, Vaughn's contract with the Army ended. He was offered a renewal, but after discussion with Violet, decided to decline. "I'm tired of leaving you," he admitted as they sat on the small balcony outside their living quarters, watching the sunset paint Tuckson's buildings in shades of pink and gold. "And there's a ranch for sale outside town. Nothing fancy, 100 acres, small house, decent water." "But it could be something." Violet squeezed his hand. "You miss ranch life." "I do, but only if it fits with what we're building here. Your shop is doing well. I wouldn't want to take you away from that. The ranch is close enough to ride in each day, about an hour's ride, not too far." He studied her face. "What do you think?" Violet considered the prospect. The shop was indeed thriving, but she had recently hired a young Mexican woman, Alina, who was proving to be a skilled seamstress in her own right. With Alina's help, she might be able to split her time between town and ranch. "I think," she said slowly, "that I'd like to see this ranch." They rode out the next morning, Violet comfortable now on Willow's back after months of regular riding. The property lay to the east of Tucson, in rolling grassland backed by mountains. The house was small but solidly built, with a wide porch facing the sunrise. A barn and corral stood nearby, and a creek wound through the lower pastures. As Vaughn showed her around, pointing out the good grazing land and the potential for expanding the house, Violet found herself envisioning a life here, mornings spent watching the sunrise from the porch, evenings under the stars, perhaps a garden where things would actually grow, unlike the parched earth of Yuma. "We could make it work with the shop," she said as they sat on the porch steps, sharing the lunch they'd brought. "I could ride in 3 days a week. Alina can handle the rest with my supervision." Vaughn's eyes lit up. "You like it then?" "I love it," she said honestly. "It's peaceful here." Beautiful. The decision was made. Within a month, the ranch was theirs, and they began the process of making it a home. Vaughn purchased a small herd of cattle and several horses, focusing on the breeding program he'd had to abandon years before. Violet divided her time between the ranch and the shop, finding that the arrangement gave her the best of both worlds: the creative fulfillment of her business and the peace of their country home. Their first Christmas at the ranch was a quiet celebration, just the two of them in the small house that they had slowly been improving. Violet had hung evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and a small tree stood in the corner, decorated with handmade ornaments. As they sat before the fire after dinner, Vaughn presented her with a small wrapped package. Inside was a silver brooch, exquisitely crafted in the shape of a wild rose. "It's beautiful," Violet breathed, running her finger over the delicate petals. "Read the inscription," Vaughn urged. On the back, engraved in tiny letters, were the words, "To the strongest woman I know, all my love, V." Tears filled Violet's eyes. "You remembered what you said that first day. How could I forget? It was the moment that changed everything." He drew her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You were the strongest person in that church, Violet. You still are the strongest person I know." She leaned into his embrace, overwhelmed with gratitude for the journey that had brought them here from humiliation in that Yuma church to this moment of perfect contentment. "I have something for you too," she said after a moment. "2 things, actually." She handed him a package containing the new shirt she had made him, cut from the finest fabric she could find. But it was the second gift, not wrapped, not tangible, that made her heart race with anticipation. "I've been to see Dr. Matthews in town," she said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. He believes the doctor in Phoenix might have been wrong about my ability to have children." Vaughn went very still. "What are you saying?" Violet took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "I'm saying that in about 7 months, we might need an extra stocking on that mantle." The joy that transformed his face was everything she could have hoped for. He gathered her into his arms with a whoop of delight that made her laugh through her happy tears. "A baby," he said in wonder. "Our baby. Dr. Matthews says we should be cautious. It's early yet, and given my history." "We'll be cautious," he assured her, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "But Violet, this is a miracle. A new beginning, she agreed softly. 6.5 months later, Violet gave birth to a healthy baby girl whom they named Hope. She had Vaughn's startling blue eyes and Violet's delicate features. 2 years after that, she was joined by a brother, Samuel. By the time the children were school age, the ranch had prospered. Vaughn's breeding program had produced horses sought after throughout the territory, and the cattle herd had grown substantially. Violet's dress shop, now managed day to day by Alina, who had become both employee and dear friend, continued to thrive. They had added several rooms to the house, which rang with children's laughter and the comfortable sounds of a happy family. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Vaughn surprised Violet with a trip back to Yuma. She had been reluctant at first. The memories of her life there were largely painful, but he had insisted it would bring closure. The town had changed little in the decade since they'd left. As they walked down the main street, Violet on Vaughn's arm and their children skipping ahead, she felt the stares of recognition from old acquaintances. Alina Prescott emerged from the general store, her face now lined and her hair streaked with gray. She stopped short at the sight of Violet, her eyes widening as she took in the handsome husband, the beautiful children, the elegant dress that spoke of prosperity. "Mrs. Prescott," Violet greeted her politely. Alina seemed at a loss for words. "Mrs. Irvine, isn't it now? I heard you had moved to Tucson." "Yes, we have a ranch there, and I still keep my dress shop in town." Violet's smile was genuine, free of the bitterness she might once have felt. "And these are our children, Hope and Samuel." Alina's gaze lingered on the children, a complex emotion crossing her face. "They're beautiful," she said finally, with what appeared to be sincere admiration. You look well, Mrs. Irvine, very well indeed. Thank you, life has been kind to us." Violet felt Vaughn's arm tighten around her waist in silent support. After a moment of awkward silence, Alina nodded and continued on her way. Violet watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of emotions, not triumph or vindication, as she might once have imagined, but something more like peace. "Was that one of the mean ladies from the church?" Hope asked, her young face serious as she looked up at her mother. Violet exchanged a glance with Vaughn, seeing in his eyes the same memory of that fateful Sunday. "Yes, sweetheart, but that was a long time ago. Did she say sorry?" Samuel wanted to know. Vaughn knelt to his son's level. "Sometimes, Sam, people don't know how to say sorry with words, but you can see it in their faces when they realize they were wrong." As they continued their walk through Yuma, past the church where they had first met, Violet felt the last lingering ghosts of her past finally laid to rest. The town that had once been the site of her greatest humiliation was now just a place one that had, in its cruel way, set her on the path to profound happiness. That evening, in their hotel room after the children were asleep, Violet stood by the window looking out at the stars over the Colorado River. Vaughn came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Any regrets?" he asked softly, echoing the question he'd asked a decade earlier as they left this town behind. Violet turned in his arms, looking up at the face she had loved for 10 years, the face that had aged with hers, that had witnessed her joys and sorrows, her triumphs and fears. "Not a single one," she said, and sealed the words with a kiss. In the years that followed, their family continued to grow and flourish. Hope became a talented horsewoman, following in her father's footsteps with the breeding program. Samuel showed an aptitude for business, eventually taking over management of the ranch's increasingly complex affairs. 2 more daughters joined the family, Grace and Faith, completing the circle of love that had begun on that Sunday morning in Yuma. When a stranger had stood up for a woman, everyone else had judged and found wanting. The dress shop, eventually passed on to Alina's daughter, remained a fixture in Tucson well into the new century. Its name, New Beginnings, a testament to the power of second chances. And Violet and Vaughn, growing old together in the house they had built with their own hands, never forgot the journey that had brought them together, a journey that had transformed humiliation into strength, loneliness into connection, and sorrow into a joy more profound than either could have imagined.